Welcome, young scholars, to Government 1 at City High School. The first big question we have today is, why should I care about this government class? And the first thing that I want you to do in your notes is to create a list of everything you did this morning, starting with the moment that you woke up. I want you to be specific. I want you to write down at least 5 things, starting with, I woke up at whatever time you woke up, and then give me a detailed list. So pause the video at this point and jot down some of the things that you've done throughout the course of the day today. All right, so the first thing I do is I wake up. I have a BTS alarm clock, and oftentimes then I might hit the snooze button, but eventually I'll wake up. And one of the things I want us to first think about is, how do we all know what time it is? Like, who decides what the time is? Some of you might think as well, I just look at my phone, or, the clock tells me what time it is. The more interesting philosophical question is, how does your phone know what time it is? And the answer to that question might surprise you to some degree. The answer is
the government.
The government. It's the government that ultimately decides what time it is. And you actually can find out what the exact precise time is by going to a website called time.gov. So you go to that website and you will find the official US time. It will tell you whatever device you're using to open it up. If your clock on that particular device is off by any particular amount, it will also show you the location of various time zones. And it is also the government that sets and establishes the location of time zones in the United States. The agency that's responsible for keeping track of time is known as the National Institute of Standards and Technology. So one of the things we'll learn about government is that they will establish agencies to carry out many of their various functions. And this particular agency has developed technology, an atomic clock, that is incredibly precise, and that establishes a standard time for the entire United States. Now, as you look at this map, one of the things you might notice is, like, what's up with Arizona? It seems like they maybe do things a little bit different in Arizona from the rest of the states. And that's because in Arizona, the state government passed a law that's saying, we, Arizona, are not going to observe daylight savings time. So we're not going to spring forward and then fall back in order to ensure that there's more daylight during the hours when normal people are awake. But you'll notice that not all of Arizona follows that particular law. And that's because in the northeastern part of Arizona, the Navajo indigenous group have a reservation in that area. And they have decided that they do want to observe daylight savings time. Now, within the Navajo reservation is another reservation, a tribal government called the Hopi, and they have made the decision, like the rest of the state, to not observe daylight savings time. When we say that it's government that ultimately sets the time, we need to be a little bit more precise. Whenever we're talking about government in this class, we should be referring to governments, because there are multiple governments. There is the U.S. federal government, there are state governments, there are local governments, there are tribal governments. In Arizona, actually, as you're driving down one of the roads, if you're looking at your phone, it will change times 4 or 5 times within the course of about a 30-mile stretch, because of the nature of how time works in that particular part of the United States. The next thing that I do on my list is that I go to the bathroom. The next thing I do is I usually shower. And as I'm doing that, it causes me to think, how do we get water in and out of the toilet and shower? And the answer to that question is
the government.
The government. For most students that go to City High School, water and sewer services are provided by the local government, the city of Iowa City, and they will ensure that we have clean water that we can use to drink and shower. Next thing that I do is I get dressed. As I'm getting dressed, one of the things that I check out are the tags on my shirts. One of the questions I sometimes ask myself is, why do all clothes say where they're made and what size they are? And the answer to that question is
the government.
The government. There is a federal law, 15 U.S. Code or USC Section 70 is a federal law that requires labels to be put on any clothes that are sold in the United States. Those requirements include you have to indicate the size, the fiber content, the country of origin, and care directions. The next thing that I do is I eat breakfast, my delicious breakfast of cookies and Coca-Cola. How, though, do we know that what we are eating and drinking is safe? And the answer to that, of course, is
The government.
the government. In 1906, the U.S. government passed the Food and Drug Act. It established a federal agency called the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, and they're responsible for doing things like inspecting businesses that are producing food and drinks. In 1910, there was an important case that arose under the Food and Drug Act. There was concern among members of the federal government that a particular product that was being shipped and sold in the United States was dangerous. And that product was not alcohol, Coca-Cola. The United States government sued Coca-Cola in 1917, claiming that it contained poisonous and habit-forming drug. So some of the bottles and kegs of Coca-Cola were confiscated. And at that point, a lawsuit was initiated, and Coke, in order to defend itself, started hiring some scientists to do research on the effects of what the government was claiming was this poisonous habit-forming drug. Can you guess what it was? It was not cocaine. It was actually the ingredient of caffeine. And those scientists studied the effects of caffeine and presented evidence in court. The caffeine in Coke was not something that was in fact poisonous or habit forming. So it was not in fact a drug. And that is why you can get access to caffeine in your energy drinks and your coffee today. There is a drug, though, that I make sure that I use every morning when I brush my teeth. And that drug is toothpaste. And if you ever look carefully at the labels on toothpaste, it does indicate that fluoride is in fact an active drug. You have to be careful. You don't want to just feed fluoride to your children. And one of the reasons that warning exists is because the government has decided that fluoride is in fact a drug. The next thing I do is I get in the car and I will drive to school, and I know what side of the road to drive on. Why do I know that? The answer is
The government.
the government. Not all governments have decided that we should drive on the right side of the road, but here in Iowa, there's a state law that says vehicles shall be driven on the right half of the roadway. So one of the things governments does is to establish laws that create rules and standards that we all have to follow. Now, the next thing that I do is I come to school, and it leads to the question, why exactly are you in school? The answer is
The government.
the government. There is an Iowa state law that requires parents, guardians, or legal custodians to cause their children to attend some public school or some accredited non-public school. Now, what happens if you don't attend school? Well, the answer is that your parent can be found guilty of a misdemeanor. And the consequences, there are some other steps first, but the other consequences could be that they could find themselves in prison for no more than 10 days, or they could be fined no more than $100. Now, there could be some consequences for you too if you're between the ages of 16 and 18 in Iowa, and that is that you're not allowed to receive a driver's license. So the state law says that if you don't attend school, you shall not receive a full driver's license until the age of 18. The next question is, why exactly do we have to take this particular government class? And the answer to that question is the same. It's the government. There is another state law that requires school districts to teach instruction in the government, and that's a requirement for graduation. My point here is what, right? Is that the government is way up in our business. Every single thing almost that we come in contact, we can make some connection between that thing and the role the government plays, either in regulating it or establishing it. And so what I want you to do is select one of those items that you wrote down in your list of things that you did and explain how the government is involved in that particular thing. Use any of the examples that we just went through, but start to make those connections. Because one of the things that I think you will see is that the government is a little bit like The Matrix. If you've ever seen the movie The Matrix, one of the things you realize is that when you look around, you just become conscious like the government is everywhere, right? The government is the school building that you're in. It's the desk that you're sitting in. It's the Chromebook that you're looking at. It's me, your teacher, teaching these things because I'm an employee of the government. The government really is everywhere. And there's a movie, The Matrix.
Do you want to know what it is?
It is, in fact, the government, right? And at this point, you have to make a decision. Are you willing to go down the rabbit hole with me and explore and learn more about the government? Or I guess you don't have a choice because compulsory school attendance laws and the requirement for graduation being taking government class. So government is the most relevant class I think that you will take in your high school career. That's the argument that I want to make to you. And hopefully you will start to see all the different ways that government impacts our life, which leads to the biggest question in this class. And that is, what is the proper role of government in our society? If government is up in our business, should they be? Or is government doing too much? Because every time government gets involved, that then causes us to lose a little bit of our freedom, right? To make our own decisions, to not be told by the government what we should and shouldn't be doing. So as we think about this question, what is the proper role of government in our society? We should ask ourselves, what should government be doing? What should government be staying out of in our lives? What powers should we be giving to our government? When you think about the major issues that exist in society today, from abortion to climate change to school curriculum to the legalization of marijuana to gun control to LGBTQ rights to cell phones, things that that impact you on a day-to-day basis. Can you use your cell phone in school, or is there going to be a teacher telling you have to put it away? To hallway passes, every single major issue, it really turns on the question is, should that be something that government is regulating and making decisions over, or is that something that I should have ultimately more free will and free choice for myself? So the next big question I want us to address is, what is a democracy? And let's start that question by just answering the more basic question is, what is government? So government is the institution and the processes through which power is exercised and decisions or public policies are made for society. So it is the institutions, it's the systems that are put in place, it's the processes, it's the decisions that are ultimately exercised, it's the laws that are passed, it's the regulations or the rules in schools that are established. All of that constitutes government. And so as you reflect on, well, who ultimately makes decisions for you? Right now it's 2023 and the current president is Joe Biden. In Iowa, our current senators are Chuck Grassley and Joni Ernst. Our current House member is Marionette Miller Meeks. There's the U.S. Supreme Court, 9 justices on the Supreme Court. Those are the major decision makers when it comes to the federal government, the national government right now. But the state also has their own government. And in Iowa, our current governor in 2023 is Kim Reynolds. Our state senator for this particular area where City High School is Janice Weiner. Our current House member for this district is a former student of mine named Adam Zabner. There's the Iowa State Supreme Court with their 7 justices. And what gives these individuals the power to make decisions on our behalf, right? The answer to that question really turns on this foundational question of, well, where does government power come from? So people who have the right to make decisions or to exercise power have what we refer to as authority. And where does then authority come from? Like, if you think about power as being kind of like electricity, right? It has to come from a source. And ultimately, the source of the government's power and authority, it came from ultimate highest power, God or the gods in any given society. And if you studied world history, you've learned there's different terms to this throughout history. There was the divine right to rule, or in China, the mandate of heaven. It's pretty hard to argue with authority coming from God, the ultimate power. But eventually, some people in the 1600s, the 1700s, the 1800s, as a result of a movement we'll study later on called the Enlightenment, realized maybe that's not the best way to do it, because not everyone believes in the same God or gods. And it's kind of arbitrary, right? Why does God choose the person that they choose? And so some people realize maybe there's a different kind of ultimate source of power. And that is whom? That is the people themselves, right? It's the people who ultimately could decide who to bestow authority or power on, right? And so that was a concept we'll talk again more about later called the consent of the governed. So government derives its power from the consent or the agreement of the people, right, to grant authority to particular individuals. Now, when power plus accepted authority is combined, that's what gives leaders and rulers legitimacy. Rulers have been doing different things throughout history to reinforce or increase their legitimacy, right? They take various other actions to increase their legitimacy, including, go all the way back to the pharaohs of Egypt who built massive tombs for themselves in the form of pyramids, right? We still do this today by building magnificent buildings that house our government. Rulers have created art to legitimize their power, right? This is an image showing one of the first known rulers in history in Mesopotamia. Here he is shanking a lion, showing himself, engaged in this really heroic feat. Leaders still do this today, right? Individuals like former President Trump who have created NFTs showing and trying to demonstrate, his power and authority. So the United States, what is the ultimate foundation of our government's authority and legitimacy? If you really want to trace the origins of authority and legitimacy in our country, you have to know this. This is the Constitution. Now, this is only the first page. It's a 4-page document. But read the first 3 words of the U.S. Constitution, right? We the people. That's where the consent of the government comes in, right? We the people are establishing a set of rules and laws and norms for our society, and we are bestowing authority, and we are offering and giving our consent to give power and authority to the individuals that we ultimately assign through the system that we have developed that is spelled out in the Constitution. Now, what form of government do we have in the United States? One of the creators of the Constitution was this man, Benjamin Franklin. And he was asked as he left the Constitution Hall in Philadelphia in 1787, what kind of government have you given us? And the answer that he gave is not a democracy. It's a republic, if you can keep it. Now, what is a republic? The U.S. government is a representative democracy. That's also known as a republic. Now, what is a republic? In a republic, the people exercise the decision-making authority to elect representatives who make decisions on our behalf. That is how most decisions are made in the United States. It's not by giving every single person the right to vote on every single issue, but instead to have people vote for representatives who ultimately make decisions on our behalf. This gets back to the concept of what is a democracy. If you break that word down, the root word's demo. Demo means people, and the rest of it, kratia, means rule or strength. So people have the right to rule in a democracy. You have to then ask yourself, what do we really mean by the people? Does it mean all people? If you go back to the very first democracy that was established in world history in ancient Athens, you'll note that the only people that actually had the power in Athenian democracy were citizens of Athens, so not foreigners. They had to be male, so women were excluded from participating in the democracy. They were not allowed to go to the assembly and cast votes. And so be aware that when we're talking about democracy, we have to understand that that does not necessarily mean all people. In fact, still today in our democratic system, who are still excluded, children, felons, people who are not citizens of the United States. Now, when we think about democracy, we have to ask this question. What are the features of a healthy democracy? As Benjamin Franklin said, we only have a republic if we can keep it. Keeping a representative democracy is a very difficult task to keep it healthy. So what are the important features? I would argue there are 5 important features of representative democracy. But take a minute to jot down your opinion as to what are the critical features of a healthy democracy. All right, for me, the characteristics of a healthy democracy include 1, citizens must be educated about public issues and the candidates that seek power. You have to have an educated populace to make good decisions, or else we're going to end up with President Kanye West. Second characteristic, citizens must actively participate in the functions of government, right? There are certain things that we are expected or in some cases required to do, whether it's voting, or jury duty, or serving in the military. An important function of government is defense. Third, voting. It must be widely accessible, and people must trust the results. There can't be any doubt or question about legitimacy of the election process, or else that's how we run into problems as a representative democracy. Fourth, government must protect individual liberties, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of religion. They must ensure justice. They must promote equality for all. That is a important characteristic of a healthy democracy, is that we have liberty and justice and equality for all, just like the Pledge of Allegiance suggests. Fifth, decisions should uphold the principle of majority rule. It's important that majority ultimately are making the decisions, but the majority has to recognize and preserve the rights of minorities. Whether it was young Ruby Bridges, who was prohibited from attending school, government had to step in, right, and protect minority rights while still upholding the principle of majority rule. So to sum up, what is our big questions we should be able to answer after watching this video? First, why should I care about this government class? And second, what is a democracy? As always, thanks for watching.